Hello everybody, welcome along to this presentation put together by myself, James Parker of Longniddry Golf Club. And this presentation is designed to give you an overview of what we've been up to in the last couple of years. I appreciate that since I started it's been difficult to get together with everything that's going on in the world, particularly our global pandemic, etc. So I thought I'd put this presentation together to talk about a little bit about what we've been up to in the last couple of years and some of the problems we've faced and overcome, and also talk about a little bit about the things we're doing this winter to help you understand some of the winter works that are going on. 100 years of golf this year here at Longniddry, and I think all would agree that it's been a fairly successful year. Turf performance has been good, and if you told me at the start when I first came for the interview that we would have had turf coverage as well as we'd had, then I would have been shocked if not surprised. I wasn't always convinced myself, if I was honest, but fortunately we've managed to produce some good surfaces this year and are looking to produce some good going forward. So I thought I'd take you through this presentation and walk you through it on various points. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you find the time to sit through it and dip in and out of it when you can. So what do we have on the agenda for you today then in this presentation? Well, first and foremost, I thought I'd talk about the number one thing, and that is turf performance. And that is turf performance relating to greens, fairways, approaches and tees. Talk you where we've made progress there and where we're looking to go in these areas. Secondly, I thought I'd talk you through the beating heart of our facility, which is our maintenance facility. Everything that happens originates in the maintenance facility, and therefore I wanted to talk to you about the state that we kind of found it in, what we've done to upgrade that, little minor upgrades we've done along the way, and some of our plans for the future of our maintenance facility. Thirdly, machinery. Everything that happens on the golf course is a result of some machinery work, so machinery is optimal to us. What condition have we got that in? How have we been maintaining that? What have we been investing in? And what have we been reconditioning for reuse on the golf course over the past couple of years? Irrigation. Fourthly, we are a sand-based links golf course, therefore irrigation is important to us. But like most systems, our system is aging. I want to talk you through some of the issues we've been having with the irrigation system and how we've gone about rectifying those, and the path we're on to try and get a more robust irrigation system over the coming years. And finally, I want to talk about winter works. So obviously we've started our winter works already. I want to talk to you about what we're up to this winter, what are the goal is of that, and how we see the golf course looking going forward with future winter projects. So first things first, let's look at the thing that directly affects you the most as the golfer, and that is turf performance and ball interaction with the turf. So if we look at the general overview first, the turf performance overview, and this is a bit like our school report card. How would that read for the last couple of years? Well, I think we've seen a general improvement in grass coverage in all areas, and that's particularly been so in the last 6 months. What we have here at Longniddry is a decade of dry down and drought, hydrophobic layers throughout the profile. We had high organic matter contents and therefore resulting in high pore dominance. And these are very susceptible to loss of grass coverage very quickly. So we've definitely seen an improvement in that. And where we didn't have grass coverage in the past, we do have grass coverage. I'm not here to suggest that that is perfect grass coverage, or those are the sort of grass species that we would desire, but it is grass coverage nonetheless. Over the last couple of years we've been taking data, and we have data suggesting some agronomic gains, and these are agronomic gains in the organic matter department. So we're seeing reductions in organic matter, which is then having knock-on effects for what happens above ground. In this autumn we had a good strike with overseeding, so we did an autumn disc overseed this year and had a good strike with that. Now the thing with having high organic matter content is that generally if you do an overseed you would get some sort of germination, but often poor establishment. Now we're starting to see good germination and establishment, so the seed that we put down in the autumn is still there now and is still flourishing in large areas. We can't hide the fact that we are still predominantly poor dominant, and we're going to be predominantly poor dominant for a good while yet. To get on top of that, we have to get our organic matter levels to sustainable levels, and therefore that makes it a lot easier to ingress fine grass into the sward through overseeding, and we get a lot better strike rates with that. But that's not going to change overnight. And also within areas, particularly shaded areas with high tree line and high scrubland, we are going to be predominantly poor, and we are going to be fighting that for a good while. Being predominantly poor makes us highly sensitive to changing climatic influences. So poor as the grass it is highly sensitive to drought, highly sensitive to disease pressure, highly sensitive to humidity, and highly sensitive to golfer traffic. And therefore it's always going to be a fighting battle. And that's where we're always trying to manage what we have for now. So what we see is a direct correlation between the exterior and the interior. And what we mean by that is everything that we do on the exterior or below ground directly influences what we produce. So whether it be organic matter levels below ground producing high pore surfaces, or whether it be shaded areas producing susceptibility to disease, everything that happens on the exterior of the building directly affects the interior. So if we were to look at that last sentence of the turf performance overview, this direct correlation between the exterior and the interior, the image on screen now would be the perfect pictorial representation of that. Now this building here is obviously in quite a poor state of repair. Now if I said to you that, a splash of paint on the walls, a few pictures hung up, and that's going to be your perfect property, would you think I was mad? Well, undoubtedly you would, because it doesn't matter how much paint you put on that, the building walls and the roof are caving in. And that really is similar to our golf course. If we don't get the exterior right, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get the interior right. So the exterior could be things like our high organic matter content, for example, that produce predominantly poor annual meadow grass surfaces. It could be our high tree lines that make us susceptible to disease. It could be our high scrubland populations of sea buckthorn that undermine tees, undermine greens, sapping nutrient and water out of them. Or it could simply be our poor irrigation coverage, which then causes us to lose grass coverage in certain areas. These are the exterior components that if these aren't right, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get the interior correct. You see, if I was to look at that building and I bought it and I put a new kitchen in it straight away, or a new bathroom, would you suggest that I'd wasted money? Well, of course you would. It would be a complete waste of money. And the same goes for us. Putting in good architecture, putting in good golf course features into an environment that is not correct will often result in failure. So if we switch on to turf performance then, and turf performance on the greens firstly, what have we been doing on the exterior that is going to directly affect our sward composition or the interior? Well, on screen there are various machines that we've used throughout the last couple of years that do various different processes, but are all designed to improve our sward composition. In the top left there we've got our Pro Core aerator, so whether we're doing solid or hollow core aeration, breaking up the soil pan, creating air pockets, creating space for roots to develop into, and harnessing microbiology to help us break down organic matter. In the top right there, just out of screen, you've got a drop seeder, bags of seed, so pot seeding into these areas where we're aerating and creating that pot for seed to germinate into. In the bottom left we've got our sanding, so diluting organic matter and trying to firm up the surfaces. And you'll see an increased amount of sanding through our off season. So this is something we're developing as we go along, is trying to do more of our sanding in the off season, trying to go every 3 to 4 weeks during the off season, so that we're not always directly impinging on golf through the main playing season. we've got in the centre there, we've got our air injection machine. So blasting air up to 12 inches down the profile, fracturing the lower profile and creating again these air pockets through the profile, helping water penetrate and helping get our soil water air balance ratio in proportion. And bottom right there you've got our disc seeders, so integrating disc seeders into our maintenance program so that we're getting good strike from our overseeding processes. And we've certainly seen that in the last autumn overseed where we used this disc seeder. We've seen a really good strike, high germination rates, leading on to high establishment rates. So when we look at the exterior, the greens exterior, and we look at managing that exterior, the first thing we're going to be managing is organic matter. And the organic matter here has historically been high with high thatch levels. Now this thatch is like a vicious cycle that we get into, because high thatch levels lead to high disease susceptibility. High thatch holds water like a sponge when it's wet, making the greens soft. It mats over in the summer, making the water impenetrable, so we end up using more water. And because it creates this layer, it really only favours shallow rooting grasses, i.e. your annual meadowgrass. And lo and behold, your annual meadowgrass is the greatest thatch producer. These high poor annual surfaces then become even more disease susceptible. They start checking out. So what happens? People feed it, they water it to get it to come back, and this vicious cycle keeps continuing. So to break that cycle, you saw overleaf there that we were doing aeration, whether that be solid, hollow, harnessing microbiology to break down organic matter, and sanding to dilute that organic matter. And this is kind of the result of that. So these are tables, and what these show is organic matter accumulation through various different levels of your soil profile. And these are measured on something called loss on ignition. So we've got these measured down to 80 mil increments, and they're measured at every 20 mil increments. So what we've got there is the summer of 2019 and the spring of 2021. Now in the summer of 2019, you can see there that we were measuring greens, 5, 6, 12, 18 were our target greens, and in 21 we went 5, 8, 12 and 17. So we kept two reference greens the same, i.e. 5 and 12, but what we wanted to do is extend our target greens out to a wider variety of the golf course. I felt that the top four were a little bit narrow in terms of distance. I wanted to go to the peripheries of the golf course to get the best overview. But we still had those two tested greens the same, which are the ones highlighted, so we could get a good idea of what sort of progress we were making in those areas. So what we're looking for in each increment really is a target of below 4 from 20 down to 80, and around 4 to 6 in the first 20. So anything around 4 or just below 4 is good for us. And you can see there in the summer of 2019, particularly in the top 40 mil on green 5 and green 12, we were high. I mean, way high in green 5, so you know, way higher than we should be. 4 to 6 we should be at, and we're up at 11.2. In green 12 there, 4 to 6 again we should be at, and we're up at 9.4. And it's this top 40 mil really that's going to determine the nature and how the greens perform, whether that be they perform softer and they're more attentive, or whether they're firmer and drier. The lower 40 mil we tend to concern ourselves less with, as the organic matter gets buried, it naturally degrades anyway, but that top 40 mil is the one that we're really interested in. So we can see now in the spring of 2021, after we've done some work, after we've done some sanding, etc., after we've done a little bit of hollow coring, you can see how those rates have reduced, particularly on green 5 for example. That's come down from 11.2 to 6.7. So we're not quite within target area yet, but we're getting there. And we're starting to notice that we've got improved grass coverage on that green for longer in the year. So that's just a direct result of what we've been doing. We then notice that some of that organic matter gets buried a little bit lower down because the sand accumulates over the top. But again, in the lower 40 mil, there's nothing particularly to worry about there. We're still well within our target range. So by doing some of the necessary works, and I'm not saying that we've been doing them highly intensively, but just doing a little bit more of them, we're already reaping the result. And the result of that is a better sward composition. It's also an increased overseeding strike, and we're seeing now grass coverage throughout the year. So that is a small win, and we're going to keep going with that throughout the winter through the sanding process to try and drag those down a bit further. Ideally we want to get these to around 4%. When we start getting around to about 4%, we start to see great strikes from our overseeding, particularly from our first year overseeding. And that's when we're going to really start developing the firmness and really start improving the composition of our sward. And here are a couple of results of those organic matter readings and the effect that that has, particularly on things like overseeding. So you can see there on the left, and that is the disc overseeder that was run through in the autumn there, and you can see the strike that that's had. Very good seedling production there, good germination, and that has led on actually to good establishment, and we're still seeing that seed flourish now, which is excellent to see. And on the right there, that's a picture of green 13, and that was one of our best uptake greens overseeding wise, which was overseeded with straight fescue, and we've had a great strike with that, and we'll keep going with that. And I think this year the greens have performed fairly well. You know, I think the complements have been good. They've rolled well for a good proportion of the season, and even now into November we're still seeing decent grass coverage and decent ball roll. And these are all direct effects of managing the lower surface, which gets the upper surface where we want it. So when we spread out from our greens onto their collars, approaches and surrounds, it's very much our intent to try and treat these as greens going forward. So a lot of the maintenance practices that we do on greens get stretched out onto our approaches, and that'll become ever increasing as the years progress. Collars and approaches really on links course should perform very similar to greens, and we would certainly like to see more putters and more hands around our greens complexes, making the game a little bit easier for our beginner golfers, but also a little bit more challenging for our expert golfer. So the idea is to try and give us as much a variety in short game area as we can. To do that, as I say, we've spread out our maintenance practices. So you'll see very similar things there, like bottom left pot seeding approaches in specific areas. We've done a little bit of disc seeding this autumn with varied success, and that'll continue as the years go on. We've also done a little bit of verticutting on the approaches. Unfortunately, our approaches have a lot of ryegrass in them, and it's quite coarse rye, so we've tried to refine these down with verticutting. As we go through the years and we do more overseeding, this should naturally deteriorate, and we should sort of see a little bit better and a little bit more fineness of leaf. And again, as we restrict our fertilizers and restrict our water usage down, that'll also help. I think the biggest impact that we've had is stretching out our wetting agent program onto approaches, and by extension some of our fertility as well. Our wetting agent program, wetting agent really makes water wetter, so it helps it penetrate the surface, and then some of the good surfactants can hold that a little bit lower down, making water more efficient and more available for the plant to use when it needs it. And that's what we've been doing. We've been using wetting agents on the collars, approaches and runoffs this year with some good success, and we've certainly held a lot more grass coverage on them this year than we have in previous, so that'll continue, and that will continue to develop. A big part of that though is also finding the irrigation heads on approaches. A lot of the irrigation heads on approaches has become overgrown and lost over the years. A lot was seriously damaged in areas that didn't have a head in at all. There was just pipe work, so we've added heads into these. We've replaced all the broken heads. We've been meticulous about setting the arcs on heads, so that we're trying not to water long rough areas. We're trying to keep our water solely for the bits that need it. And we've also extended the arcs on some to take in more of our runoffs that we've extended this year. So seeing good progress with the approaches. The one thing that I would like to see more of, and as our finance improves over the next coming years, particularly when we're out of the COVID pandemic, we'll start to add in sanding to these areas, so stretch our sanding out from greens onto the approaches, firming these areas up. And basically what you'll see is our greens and approaches getting treated in very similar ways, and hopefully the results should be very similar. And here, as you can see, is just a couple of our approaches this year and how they've come on. And in the sunshine they've looked very good, and they've certainly tightened up. We've had a couple of compliments towards the back end of the year of how much better they've looked this year. The cutouts that we added around bunkers etc. are really nice. They're going to take a little bit longer to develop, and we've kept them at higher height of cut. but as we invest in our machinery in the future, what we'll start to see is these tighten down and refine down. We can box off the clippings more on these and refine the leaf blade down. You can see there on the right hand picture, the picture of 13, so that bunker there was in the semi-rough previously, and that's all now being added into the tight grass areas and the irrigation arcs set so that they pick up these areas. So in the sun they look very, very good. They're starting to play a lot better. Still a lot of work to do on them, but vastly improved from where we were in a work in progress. And not a huge story to this image, it was just a particular image from the summer that I liked and I shot at the time. But the more you look at it, you can kind of see there on the approaches where we've adjusted the arcs of the heads, etc. We're keeping the approach fairly well maintained and fairly well grassed and looking fairly healthy. You can sort of see there's areas though where we're browning off, particularly the top of the bunker left of 4 there and a little bit around the back of the 3rd green. These areas aren't necessarily covered by irrigation, so we have to hand water these when we can, but again that's time consuming during the middle of the playing season. But overall pretty good there on the wetting agent, having a good effect on these areas and keeping grass coverage. Yes, in areas it's gone brown, but as long as the grass coverage remains and the wetting agent works, that should come back very, very nicely, which it did towards the autumn. So fairways are a little bit of a different story. Fairways have been a challenge now for the club for the past few years. As we've seen dry downs in the spring, they've been massively hard to get re-wet. What we've done during the summer there is taken some core samples out of the fairways, and it doesn't matter how much rain you get, even in the winter, there's areas of the profile down there, lower down, that are still powder dry. And getting these to re-wet is priority number 1. Once these re-wet, we will start to see grass coverage return and we'll start to see better strikes from any potential overseeding we do in the future. To try and break these layers, you can see top right we've been using the verti-drain, so you'll have seen that out over the past few days. We've got a few more fairways to go with that, and then we'll run that again at the start of next year. And again, this is just punching holes lower down, trying to get water down there through the winter and get it to sit lower down in the profile to help us germinate something in the spring. The spring could go either way, but we expect that it'll be dry again. That seems to be the common trend. Whether it's dry and warm or dry and cold, I'm not particularly sure, but either or can be very, very damaging to us, so it's important that we get the profile re-wet when we can. To aid in that, we'd like to spread out our wetting agent facility onto that, and hopefully increased finance and a better budget for this year should allow us to do some of that, which will help massively. Again, it's just making the use of any rainfall that we get. On top of that, we've also got our things like ammonium sulfate, or soluble fertilizers, ammonium sulfate, ferrous sulfate, that now we should be able to put out next year as well, which again should help some grass plant development, help some nutrition, and help create an environment where we can fill things out a little bit better. Bottom right there, we've got a tractor rake. That was just bought off eBay. It isn't an all singing and dancing one, but it does a job, a very, very good job. And again, that's just about pulling out fibre. Verti-drain's about punching through that fibre. Rake's about pulling a little bit out, getting that blown off, so that we can try and crack these fibrous layers, get water penetrated down, and then create a seed bed really, so that we can germinate grass seed into. At the minute, we've only done sporadic test bits of overseeding on fairways with very, very limited success, and that is because of this kind of thatchy mat layer that we have on the top that's very, very hydrophobic. So until we penetrate through that, until we get these profiles re-wet, we're going to see very little establishment from our grass seed. So that's what we're doing now. These are the practices we're doing now to get through these areas so that we can see good germination from overseed. It would be the ideal to maintain as much grass coverage on fairways as we can in the coming years, but for now it's a fight to get them back, and that's what we're fighting to do. The verti-drain in places this year looks a little bit messy, but not too bad. They're coming up fairly well with a mow afterwards, but again, it's all about remembering that sometimes you've got to break an egg to make an omelette, and that's what we're doing at the moment. So once we get these profiles re-wet, and keep them that way. Once we extend our wetting agent out onto these areas and our soluble feeds, we'll then start to introduce some seed into these fairways and hopefully start to establish some more consistent grass coverage year round, as we've seen on approaches and collars. So during the height of the summer, we were seeing improvements in some fairways, so things like 2, 14 and 17 spring to mind is not bad, but we were still seeing too many that were a bit patchy, 1, 7, 9, 11 and 12, all directly hampered by the higher sand cap, but also directly hampered by the dry cold spring that we had also, which didn't help. On 14 here on the left, you can see this sidewinder cut that we've added in this year, which is a beautiful little touch. So it just adds a little bit of step definition down from the fairway into the primary rough cut, so bridging cut. Adds huge definition from the tee and really looks aesthetically very pleasing, and we've added that around the majority of fairways. So some were showing signs of improvement, however there's still a lot of work to do on others. And some of the processes we mentioned over leaf there, the verti-drain that we're currently ongoing with now to crack that profile, the raking etc. to crack through this organic layer, and then the use of wetting agents and soluble feeds will all aid in that. And once we have these profiles wet, they will come back, and then we'll be able to integrate more seed into the fairways and have more successful germination in them. So that process now has started, and we'll start to see some of the fruits of the labour in the next couple of years. And the team here at Longniddry, like a lot of golf courses, stretches far beyond the maintenance facility, and these guys are certainly a part of it. Our divot crews who volunteered their time this year to help divot our fairways. Now these guys were out in all weathers, there was young, there was old, and there was always plenty of them to take on the task, and a sterling job they did over the course of the season. I think we've possibly got one more fairway divot this year where we might see some germination that will call on their efforts again, and you're always more than welcome to join them, and all the help is greatly appreciated. But a great thank you to these guys who did a sterling job this year and helped us out massively, and helped out your playability of the golf course by repairing divots. So moving on to the beating heart of your greenkeeping operation, and that is your maintenance facility. Everything that happens starts and begins at the maintenance facility. Now the maintenance facility is a combination of the good, the bad, and what I would class as the uninhabitable. And what I'm going to show you are a few slides of what we came up against at the start and where we've managed to take in that to so far. So when I arrived at the golf course at the back end of 2019 for a look, I must confess I didn't take much time to look at the maintenance facility and spent more time on the golf course. So when we came in 2020, it was quite a shock to us, the state of the maintenance facility when we arrived. And it was a shame that the guys that had come in earlier in the year had just had to put up with this for the time being, trying to focus their attentions, and rightly so, on the golf course at the time. What we were seeing in evidence of years of unusable stock that had been left was now past its sell-by date. We were seeing years of accumulated mess and clutter where you couldn't see the wood for the trees, and a lot of hoarding had gone on as well. We were also sadly seeing evidence of vermin and rat nests in evidence which you can see there in the pictures, which wasn't a pleasant sight or pleasant to deal with. We had canteen facilities that, in my opinion, weren't usable. We had welfare facilities that weren't very good at all. And it was one of our key aims to try and get this sorted as quickly as we can. And this is where a balance has to be struck. People want to see things happening on the golf course straight away when you arrive, and I totally understand that. But without getting the maintenance facility in some sort of shape, that was never going to happen. So we did commit to some of our time in the maintenance facility to try and get this right, so that we had something functionable to use going forward. So whilst funds didn't really allow us to rebuild maintenance facilities, etc., we did find cheap ways of making our maintenance facility more functionable and more usable. And that just started firstly with a good sweep out, getting everything cleaned out, getting all the machines out, getting all the equipment out and seeing what was usable and what wasn't, and just having a good sweep of the area. We also brought in somewhere in the region of 4 skips and 4 skip loads out of just complete rubbish, things that were broken, rubbish that had accumulated on the floors over the years, and got all of that out so that we could see what was going on. We then set about baying up our areas, so cleaning down the machines and baying off the areas so that every individual machine had a designated spot where everybody knew where everything went. We put whiteboards up on the walls, and this allowed us to monitor greasing and servicing, so when these had been done, at what hours, and when they needed doing again. And we could also report any problems on there and any fault finding. We could also have all our cylinder mowers, the height of cuts up on the wall, so everybody knew what height of cut they were at when they were resetting. These were changed. We had a few cutting routines up there for weekend work, some top dresser settings for when we're out sanding. So these were just quick, easily findable, so that made productivity that little bit quicker. We tidied up all our benches, screwdrivers, spanners, etc., all our hand tools, so that things again were findable. There was nothing worse than coming into the maintenance facility and spending half an hour trying to find a 13mm spanner. It's just get it up on the wall, get it clean, get it tidy, and get it in a designated spot so that people weren't wasting time. We offloaded a lot of our stock that was surplus to requirement. Unfortunately, some of it had to be skipped because it was just past its sell-by date, broken or unusable and being left to decay. And some of it we sold for some minor money here and there. We sorted out our fertilizer cupboards, palleted everything, got all our fertilizers off the floors and all our seeds off the floors so they didn't go off and that they could be used. We also had a look at our things like our fire extinguishers, got them serviced and maintained, and where applicable replaced so that we complied. And we also updated our alarm system, so we'd made our maintenance facility more functionable. Now we wanted to protect it properly, so we updated the alarm system also. So just small changes, very basic changes, not a lot of money involved there, not a lot of cost. But as you can see, it's made the maintenance facility more functional, more usable. Things are easier to find, and therefore we're more productive as a result, and things are a little bit safer. So a couple of little upgrades that we did that cost a little bit of money but not huge sums and were necessary was top left there. We added in some CCTV into our security system, so as well as upgrading our alarms, we felt the CCTV was necessary. There was no point in having a functionable maintenance facility and not protecting it properly. We also added in some new outdoor lighting, so you'll realise that when you're going out golfing earlier and earlier in the morning and trying to get more and more tee times in, that means as green staff we have to start earlier and earlier. And I'm a big advocate of starting as early as you can and trying to get out ahead of golf just in case any problems arise. Now, lighting around the maintenance facility allowed us to work safely in these areas. It was very, very poorly lit before and not very safe or secure. So we added in some new lighting last month, which is lighting up the area fantastically and allowing us to see what we're doing out and about when we're in and around the maintenance facility, letting us get out on the golf course that little bit quicker. At the bottom left there, we just threw some stone chipping down on the floor, cleared out an area just in front of the container, and that was just for people to park in. Very, very basic, but just for the staff to have somewhere to park their cars that was relatively free from ball strikes, etc., and wasn't crowding the maintenance facility and wasn't getting in the way of machines and or golfers. At the back there you'll see the container, and at the right there you'll see inside the container. So the container was purchased prior to me arriving, and we just started using it this year, give it a good clean out, etc. What we found was that the actual main bothy that was pictured in the earlier, I didn't want people sitting in there, so we've started using that as storage. I think that's fairly unusable, so we've started using the porta cabin, and it's at least given the people somewhere to dry their clothes, our staff, somewhere to dry their clothes, somewhere to sit. We intend to extend this and add another one in there, which would form the basis of somewhere to sit for the boys to eat, somewhere to sit where we can have small meetings, and somewhere we can sit where that has a usable office. So that's all to come. Further things that we'd like to do in the maintenance facility are add in bed areas for our sand. At the minute you'll see our sand sits in front of the shed on a hard pan, but really that should be in a bed area, a bed concrete area where we can get to it easily and where it's kept safe and doesn't blow away with the wind and doesn't contaminate. But those are all things that are works in progress, and we'll just keep plugging away with that as and when we can and as and when resource allows us to do that. So that was the maintenance facility, where I'm sure you'll agree we've made small improvements, necessary improvements. Now within the maintenance facility goes your machinery, and your machinery is the thing that goes out there and maintains your golf course for you, so therefore it needs to be well kept, usable, and we've got to look to invest for the future. So before we could start, we had to evaluate what machinery we had, what we could salvage, and what we could recondition in order to make it usable and functionable again. We then had to evaluate what we didn't have, what was absolute necessity for the golf course going forward, and then wider what was on our wish list. It wasn't necessity at the time, but what was desirable to take the product forward in the coming years. The first of that was the evaluation of equipment and finding what we had. And the 3 bits of kit there were all found in Woodlands. Some had problems that just needed minor rectification to get them usable again, but fairly well buried in the Woodlands. The longbow there, for example, just needed a tyre and a hose, and that's been used to flail collect rough now for the last 2 years, and does a sterling job of that for such a small bit of kit. We get round that fairly quickly, and it's done a neat tidy job this late summer and autumn. The top right there is a greenkeeper for some reason blowing a dog, but don't worry, it's my dog, so don't worry overly about that, and no dogs were harmed in that process. But the blower itself was found in the woodland as well, needed some new belts and a new belt tensioner. That's been usable, although now that is past its serviceable lifespan, and we are looking to replace that going forward. Bottom right there is just an old slitter, old fairway slitter, very basic bit of kit, but allowed us in the first couple of years just to get some cracking in on the fairways. We're tending to go with a verti-drain now as opposed to the slitter, though we'll probably use it maybe once this year because it's a quick alternative to get around aeration wise. But again, with the slitting we need to be careful on links that they don't dry out and crack open, so it's all about timing with that. But just sat there in the woodland, perfectly usable, just needed a couple of new tines on it. So these were things that we found, reconditioned, and have managed to reuse in the past couple of years. So as magical as the magical woodlands were, unfortunately we didn't find any fairway mowers in there, we didn't find any aerators, and we didn't find any hugely productive sprayers. Therefore it was a necessity that we brought in some of these pieces of kit. When I arrived here in 2020, the fairway mower that we had at the time required several £1000s worth of work, and given its age it really just wasn't worth doing, so therefore we had to find a way around that. When COVID came, fortunately we just mowed the fairways with a small triple, which was fine given the fact it was no golf, but we knew as soon as golf came back that wasn't going to work, and therefore a fairway mower would have to be acquired, and we managed to acquire an ex-demonstration fairway mower from John Deere, which has done very well for us, but again didn't cost the earth, thankfully. Alongside that we managed to bring in a Pro Gator with sprayer. The Pro Gator was an ex-demonstration unit, and the sprayer was a used sprayer from one of the bigger clubs locally, and that improved our productivity spraying, improved our accuracy and calibration spraying as well, and that's been widely used and be widely used even further next year when we spread it out onto fairways with soluble feeds, etc. Last year, as part of our 1 a year replacement program that we've introduced, we brought in a Procore 648, which is our aerator. So when we talked about the detail at the start about organic matter management, the organic matter management, there's no lie in saying that the major component of that is aeration. Therefore you need a decent aerator, and I would argue that the Procore 648 is the best aerator out there, and a lot of people swear by this machine, and I've had one at various places that I've worked and loved it. This has allowed us to spread our aeration out onto collars, approaches, runoffs, really usable on tees as well, and fantastic for greens. We've used solid aeration in it, we've used hollow aeration, and that's working very well. It's also superb for pot seeding, so that has been a massively great acquisition for the club, and you can see that in the agronomic data. The numbers spell that out. The organic matter has fallen, and it's partly down to that machine there. Going forward, we'll continue to invest in machinery, so we're trying to do the 1 a year rolling program. For years, little investment had been made, and everything ages unfortunately at the same rate, and then you're required to spend a lot. So we're trying to introduce a once a year rolling program so that we don't get to that position again, which is the sensible approach going forward. Along the way, we're trying to add things into our wish list. It would be ideal to have things like a seeder, etc. going forward, but for now, as and when, we just hire these in. But those are things that we'll look to bring in the future. So that was a brief overview of our machinery, an area we'll continue to invest in with finances continuing to improve. Another area of investment for golf courses is that of their irrigation system. An irrigation system on a links golf course is absolutely vital, a key cornerstone. So I thought I'd talk to you firstly about the component parts that make up the irrigation system, and these are the same component parts that make up irrigation systems right around the world. Firstly, we have our water source, and here we are predominantly borehole extracted, which in essence is a hole drilled into the ground, and groundwater is pumped up into the tanks. The storage tanks have large capacity. In our case, we can hold over 200,000 litres, and that is vital during the height of the summer when water requirement is higher. Being on sand, our water requirement can be higher during the summer, and experiencing wind on the links, that can also be an issue. In the bottom right, we have a controller, which in essence is a computer. That tells stations when to pop up, that tells heads when to pop up and in which order, and that can run automated systems overnight. The pumps fire water around the system, so they fire water at high pressure. They drive water through the pipework and drive water out of the head, being able to throw large distances. The pipework here is predominantly PVC with a little bit of PE pipework here and there, but predominantly PVC. That is a thing that carries water around the golf course in all areas and takes the water from the pump to the head. And the sprinkler head itself fires the water out onto the turf, and these have various arcs and various trajectories and can be fairly easily changed based on the fittings that are there in situ. Like most irrigation systems, our irrigation system here is aging at a steady rate. Our tanks are aging, our pump is 25 years plus, and some of our pipework would be 30 years plus. Our pipework being predominantly PVC, as you can see from the picture, is prone to cracking, particularly in heavy frosts, and particularly when restarting the system up after winter. Our heads are a mix of old and new. We have some older heads that may be anywhere up to 30 plus years old, and some modern heads which are under 5 years old. Around greens, aprons and tees, most of our heads are modern, and the ones that aren't, we're trying to switch those out now to get better coverage. So as I alluded to at the outset, irrigation systems can be fraught with problems, particularly aging irrigation systems like ours. And our irrigation system has certainly had plenty of problems in the last couple of years and giving me plenty of sleepless nights. We are working through those issues now, and we are getting somewhere. It's not perfect by any means, but we are working through it step by step, and we are seeing progress. The major issue this year was with our large irrigation tank, and you can see from this picture here on the left some of the problems that we were having with that. The centre pole there heavily corroded and potentially about to give way. The panelling around the side was heavily corroded and rusted in quite a few places, and the liner was obviously punctured in quite a few places and escaping water. We also have these high iron deposits on the bottom of the tank, causing issues with the suction flanges. Now, it became quite obvious during the start of the summer that the irrigation tank was losing water at a rate of knots, and therefore the decision was taken to close the irrigation tank down and try running with our 2 small tanks alone. Now, we knew we'd be running like this through the entirety of the summer. Irrigation contractors are busy through the summer, obviously trying to keep people's water on. Also, tank availability was limited with everything that was going on with Brexit and the COVID pandemic, etc. So we knew we'd be running like this for a good while. Therefore, you kind of have to think around the problem in that situation. So we were a little more vigorous with the water than I would have liked to have been this year, and that really was to try and alleviate some of the pressure if we went dry as we had in previous years. So we went on to kind of a 1 and 3 watering cycle, once on tees, once on aprons and once on greens every 3 nights. This meant the greens were a little more receptive than I would have liked this year, but it felt at the time that that was the best way to go. I didn't want to get to a situation where we were overly dry and desperate for water and we didn't have the capacity there, so we kind of erred on the side of caution this year. But thankfully, now that we're getting a new tank put into situ, that shouldn't be the case going forward. As you can see, in the autumn of this year we started rebuilding the big irrigation tank, and that is through one of our local contractors that are doing that, a very good contractor who's building that for us. And that was great to see that going up. So within that, we're going to pipe the borehole directly into that tank and isolate that tank, and the idea being that we will start to phase out the 2 small tanks and run solely on the big tank, carrying over 200,000 litres of water. So in life, you'll appreciate that sometimes things are good luck and sometimes things are good planning, and we've had little bits of both over the last couple of years. We've certainly had plenty of bad luck with the irrigation system, but we've had the odd bit of good luck also. The picture on the right is an example of good planning. We're now getting to a stage where our greens are well covered heads wise, our aprons are certainly acceptable, and our tees are acceptable too. We've changed a lot of the arcs on the sprinkler heads, so a lot of the sprinkler heads were firing into long rough areas, making the long rough more juicy, or firing into buckthorn, watering buckthorn, or watering trees, and some weren't touching the greens or turf areas at all. We've also looked at trajectories. Around here we have problems with wind, so in areas we've changed those as well. We've had over a dozen heads that were just completely broken, so some weren't popping up, some weren't firing, some had been hit on the head and were firing out the top. So we've managed to switch all of those out and replace all of those. And now we're getting to a stage where we have acceptable coverage on greens and something that we can rely on, that when we put water out, it's going into the areas that we want it to go into. And part of that is just keeping our sprinkler heads uncovered, particularly the ones around greens, knowing where they are all the time, so that when we're going out with things like tiners and that, they're not hitting the heads and damaging the heads. The picture on the left is an example of sheer good luck. Now, we do have some plans here at Longniddry, but we're not blessed with a massive amount, so we're continually adding to those when we find bits. And when they were digging up Dean Road earlier in the year, it came to our attention that there was one of our main lines was crossing the road, one of our mainline irrigation lines. Thankfully our contractors were very good around it and didn't damage it, but it gave us a chance to plot where that was and mark where that was, and actually get an understanding a little bit better of what was going on between holes 7 to 10. So just examples of good planning and good luck. Going forward with the irrigation system, we'll continue to work on it this year. We're having a few issues with our computer system and controller, which we're hoping to get sorted out this winter, ready for more automated systems next year, which should hopefully cut down on some of the 3 AM alarm clock calls for myself to come in watering, so that would help massively. And the idea really is to keep working through the irrigation system, so spending a little bit every year, so we're constantly updating it. Again, irrigation systems are like machinery. If we don't invest for long periods of time, they all age at the same time, and then we end up with larger bills of trying to replace component parts. A modern irrigation system will cost you up to £1 million to replace. That is not money that we are blessed to have here. Therefore, it is a sensible approach to try and replace little and often as we can, and try and replace bits every year, and just constantly keep updating our system so that we're getting there. So whether that's updating PVC pipework to PE and making sure that we're not getting the fracturing around the course, whether that's updating heads, whether that's updating the tank as we're doing this year, or whether that's doing renovation work to our borehole, etc. All of these works can cost minimal amounts when done in isolation, but collectively can cost large amounts. So it's our idea to keep these going throughout the years, doing little bits at a time, and just constantly trying to keep updating our system from now. It's vital on the links that we have a functional irrigation system. I'm sure you can understand the importance of that. Without it, we don't have turf grass coverage. Therefore, sensible investment in the irrigation system is just that, very, very sensible. So that was our irrigation system, a work in progress as you can see, but progress nonetheless. I thought I'd move finally on to winter works. I appreciate you've been sat now for quite a while, so I'll try and get through this fairly quickly. And this is what we're doing this winter, so what we're doing out on the golf course, what we're renovating and what we're replacing, and our thoughts going forward on the look of the golf course. So the basic premise of the winter works are laid down on this slide, and the first of these is to begin the long-term management of sea buckthorn here on the golf course. And this is where I talk about getting the exteriors of the golf course right, and sea buckthorn is one of those problem exteriors. Sea buckthorn as itself was planted way back when to stabilise dune systems. It's a very, very rapidly spreading shrub that is nitrogen fixing, so it enriches the soil round about it, causing a lot of weeds around it or heavier grasses. It's also, unfortunately, here at Longniddry, a rabbit breeding ground, so large colonies of rabbits are in these areas, and that's why we have problems with rabbits on the golf course at various times of the year. It's a penal hazard, impossible to play out of. You'll know that if you hit your ball in there, you will lose it and you won't get it back. Unfortunately, sea buckthorn really reduces the amount of diverse vegetation that is available on the links with this one monoculture, and that is due to the rapid spread of it. If you don't mow it, it will spread. Therefore, we are going to start the process of removing this year in selected areas, replacing this with dune vegetation and or sand scrapes, and bringing those into the picture. Sand scrapes or bare sand habitats create a more diverse dune system and also create habitats for native animals to colonise. Alongside that, we're going to be renovating and replacing existing greenside bunkers again between holes 14 to 17 this year. The difference with our bunker works this year is the scale of the works. In the last couple of years we've done plenty of revetted bunkers, but the beauty of it has been that we've been dropping the revetted bunker very much into the area that we're taking the old one out of, with very little land movement around about it. The ones between 14 to 17 are going to require a little bit more land movement around about it. They don't always sit in the right place, therefore they're going to take a little bit longer, and we're going to have to move a little bit more earth with those, but we've already started on those and they're coming up a treat. We've planned to renovate a specific fairway bunker on the golf course, which I'll talk about, and do some selective thinning of heavy tree areas, and the selective thinning will likely happen when the weather deteriorates or if we get snow on the ground. Areas that need thinning really to improve turf grass coverage on greens and tees, and you'll be well aware of those areas on the golf course, but it's important that we start thinning in these areas, get more sunlight in there, reduce the nutrient sapping nature of the trees and reduce the water uptake of the trees in these areas, so that our turf grass performs better, so that we don't get at these times of the year various areas of the golf course checking out at a rate of knots. Alongside these works, we're aerating all fairways, which we're currently ongoing with now, and I believe we've got a couple of fairways left to aerate, but we'll run that again through the February time to try and get as much punch through these hydrophobic areas that we talked about earlier as we can, and that's a slow process. Vertically draining fairways is a slow process which ties up a member of staff all day, every day. And then we'll be raking and flail mowing rough for the second time. So we've already done this once, but we'll run the rake and the flail mow through it again, possibly February, March time, just to try and keep thinning these rough areas out as part of our long rough management plan, and try and see some rewards from that. So that's the basic premise. I'll just go into these in a little more detail now. So firstly, seed buckthorn and scrubland management. You can see here on the screen 2 drone images taken on the golf course of 2 areas where scrubland and seed buckthorn are going to be removed. This will be towards the end of November, start of December, I would imagine, for these removals. The first area on the left is the area between the 11th tee and the 4th green. You can see that that's given us health and safety problems for the last few years now, so we aim to rectify this completely. We've got a lot of self-seeders in there that will keep self-seeding, bits of seed buckthorn, etc., that all need removing. Within that area we've got a couple of nice Scots pine that we'll be looking to retain. We'll be retaining the duneland vegetation, and then we'll be incorporating a couple of sand scrapes within this area, and a couple of pathways for maintenance vehicles, etc. And you can even see here on the drone image that there's quite a nice topography in there. Unfortunately, the scrubland flattens the topography, so once we open that up you'll be able to see all that landform again, and that's going to look very, very good. On the right there you'll see an image of just off the 12th tee, so this is around the pond, and this is a heavily dense area of seed buckthorn that is adjoining the seed buckthorn across the road as well. That's how rapidly it spreads, and this is an area that we're going to remove also. In this area we'll end up going back to bare sand around the pond, and we'll create a sand scrape in there as well, and that'll create a beautiful aesthetic and a great look to the golf course. Now what I often see in this area is, particularly off the 3rd tee, some of our older members and some of our high handicap members losing balls in there, and that's what we're trying to get away from now. This also is our biggest probably breeding area for rabbits, and an area where we notice the most destruction around bunkers, fairways, etc. on the 3rd, 11th and 12th, so that should hopefully rectify some of that situation also. So what we'll be doing in these areas, 14-ton excavator comes in, we'll be pulling the plant out, particularly buckthorn. So by pulling the buckthorn out, you pull the root out as well. You'll realise that buckthorn spreads quite vigorously under the turf, therefore it has to be pulled and the root has to come out with it also. So that's what we'll be doing here. It'll be a puller on an excavator which will pull it out. We'll then bury it and burn it. The ash pile will be buried, along with so further reducing the organic material within the profile and further reducing the nutrient uptake within the profile. A lot of the seed bed will be buried, and then the sand scrape will be created from that. So that'll be starting at the end of November, start of December, and it's going to create a great aesthetic appeal and certainly improve health and safety in certain areas also. Now this is quite an invasive process. Pulling out material like that is quite large, particularly areas where the buckthorn is dense like 12, and I don't expect it to look perfect straight away. It's not going to. What will happen is it'll be pulled out, it'll look quite messy. Once we've got all the clear up done, that'll tidy it up a little bit, and then once we've got some of the shaping in there, or some of the natural shaping has returned, that'll look better. But it's going to take a while for the duneland vegetation to develop, so it's a process that you have to kind of bear with us on. That stuff's been in there quite a few years, and is not going to come out willingly, but come out it must, and it's worth starting the process in these areas. Seed buckthorn removal is something we'll try and continue with in areas over the years, and it's going to take us a while to get it under control. Unfortunately, across the road, in the car parks, etc., on the other side of the road, there's large strands of seed buckthorn there, and these will happily traverse under the road, so it's something that we're going to have to control over the years. In the areas where we remove seed buckthorn, we will see some regeneration in the next couple of years. Undoubtedly, you won't get rid of all the seed, unfortunately, but because it'll be small regeneration, we'll be able to deal these with hand pulling and or spraying with a chemical. So that's these areas, that's these seed buckthorn areas that we're going to be starting on in the next few weeks, and really looking forward to seeing how those turn out. So moving on to bunker renovation, which seems fairly popular here at the Longniddry, which is good to see, and it's also nice to receive the feedback on some of the bunker renovation that's been done, and I'm sure you'll agree the boys work wonders with some of the bunkers that are out there at the moment. They're very, very good. You'll notice here that this is a drone image of 17, and the left side green side bunker on 17 has already been completed and revetted. Fairly easy one to do because it's been dropped back into situ where it was, so no real earth movement involved there. The right green side bunker is still to be renovated, and you'll notice a small change in shape and size there. The depth won't change greatly, so it'll still be fairly shallow, and it'll have a small revetted edge on it. To the right of the green as well, the short bunker will be renovated. Now we do realise in this area that there are a few drainage issues. We're not entirely sure where those are coming from, but we're going to use the opportunity while we're in there to have a dig around and see if we can't find where those issues are coming from, and see if we can't do something about that. The bunker will then change in appearance. It'll change in orientation and size, and probably go a little bit closer to the green and a little bit more into the ridge line, as it's a little bit out on a limb currently. In relation to revetting versus naturalised bunkers, naturalised I talked about in a previous presentation. Naturalised bunkers are something that we would tend to use in the fairway bunkering when we get to that point, but for bunkers like these that are within striking distance of the green, then revetted will generally be the way that we will go. So that's hole 17, and that'll be completed this winter. So this is the left hand side of hole 14, which you've been noticed that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks. Thankfully we've been doing over the past couple of weeks because these are two of my most hated bunkers on the golf course. I don't think they're very in keeping with the course at all, and just not a pretty sight. You can see the one on the left there. A lot of the mounding is quite sharp and not very subtle, and you can see that that's been dropped in. It doesn't look very natural at all. And these are areas where obviously the digger is required in a little more scale, and that is to pull some of the earth off the mounds and just soften them out a little bit, make them a little bit easier on the eye, and make them look like they should be there and that they haven't been dropped in deliberately. So you'll see there on the right what we've done is we've brought the digger in, we've softened off some of the mountain, all the turf is stripped off and turf cut out and got rid of. We've then brought the right hand side of the bunker in, so we've made the bunker in essence smaller in width, and the depth hasn't actually increased. The only difference is that the revetted wall now goes up to the top of the mound area, so it looks deeper, but the depth overall hasn't really increased. So that's the basic start of building the bunker there. So that's the bunker progress there. You can see the revetted walls in to the highest point. The mounding's been softened off. We've retained some of it to create the landform, but a lot of the mounding's been soft off. The revetted wall, I'm sure you'll agree, looks absolutely fantastic. And within that they've started prepping the surrounds there, bringing out the root zone, smoothing that off, ready for turf, ready for top turf. That bunker is now complete now. It's been top turfed and fenced off. So if we just try and avoid going in these areas where we can, if you have to go and retrieve a ball from out there, please do, but try and avoid stepping on the revetted wall. And we'll just try and stay out of these areas until the turf knits, and we'll get back into these in the spring. So that's come up beautifully. Really happy with that one, and that caused us then to move on to the right ones. So this is a drone image of the right of 14. Again, not the best looking bunker in the world. Orientation is not great, size and shape weren't particularly appealing either. So we were happy to get in here and do this. And I thought I'd show you this blank image first and then the annotated image afterwards, just to show you some of the thought that goes in and some of the thought process you have to go through when constructing or renovating a bunker. So that was the blank image prior of 14, and this is the annotated version, and I thought I'd put this on just to show you some of the thought that goes into when renovating a bunker or putting a bunker into situ. And really this is only about 50% of the things that go on. I couldn't fit the rest on, but these are some of the things that we go through in order to get to the final point, and I'll just take you through these. So the bunker itself, starting there on the left, want to get that a bit closer to the putting surface, potentially split this one into two and get the left one a little bit closer to the putting surface. You can see there's a lot of excess sand build-up over the years on the top lip. Try and remove that and get that a little bit tighter to the green so it doesn't look like it's sitting out on a limb. We've then got potential green extension, so you'll notice that in areas where we've brought the approaches out, we now need to bring the greens back out. So where we've settled on the approach sizes, we can now bring the greens back out to the heads, and one area of that is the back right of 14, so that needs to go out a little bit. And when we extend that green out, it means that the back right bunker, where it's split into two, will also be in play for the back of the green, which is ideal. The dotted white line is the irrigation line, so it's the irrigation line that goes from the heads to the box and then from the box to the 17th box. So it's always worth marking your irrigation lines and knowing where they are, knowing so that you're not digging through them and not compromising the pipe and the cable where it's not necessary to do so. So that's the irrigation line marked. The other one is land profile formation. So what is the land profile like? What is it formed of? Now we know that these landforms aren't natural, they don't look natural. I often say that they look a little bit like Teletubby mounds because the shaping on them is not particularly great. And we also know that this area in previous years was potentially given up for agriculture, etc. during periods in its history. Therefore these landforms have likely been dropped in at a later stage. Now what is that land profile formation? Is that sand? Is that rubble? Is that clay? What have they put back in there to build that land formation up, and how is that going to cause you a problem in construction? Now it turns out that these sadly are clay and sadly are rock. So what's happened is, on top of the sand to build these land formations up, it's not uncommon to dump rubble and clay, etc., and that builds a land formation up so that they could sit things in these. It just makes it a little tricky to renovate them and makes the drainage characteristics of them that little bit poorer. The next thing is using the topography. So we can see that the highest point of the landform is at the back, and could we use that better to be able to make the bunker more visible from the fairway? So could we use that as a back revetted wall? Could we take the bunker and sit it further back into the second bunker and sit it further back into the topography, and that give us an overall better looking aesthetic to the bunker and give us the depth that we need for the revetted wall? So not actually increasing the depth of the bunker, just forming the depth out of a visual thing from the revetted wall. Mowing practicalities, so you can see there that the arrow is pointing at a little bit of scalping there on the edge, and again this is because the shaping is not ideal. So because the mounding's a little Teletubby, as I've said before, a little bit sharp in places, this means that when you're trying to mow these tight, and the idea would be to get these between 7 and 10 mil in the height of the summer, so really tight, that the mower will scalp those and create a little bit of mess there. So can we soften these out just to make it a little bit gentler for the mower and make it so that we've got turf coverage all year round? The black line is a drain line. We know that's a drain line because we put it in 2 years ago. So this bunker was a wet bunker a couple of years ago, and we drained that to an outlet. So we know the lines of the drain line, but we also know that we've only gone so far in with that drain. So that drain may need extending, and it was tapped into a clay tile at the end. So we're possibly going to need to find out where that clay tile goes when we get in there. And that's what we've done. We've been in there and we've found out where that clay tile's gone. We've repiped that. We've drained the second bunker, which was looking a little bit wet, and we've gone in there and replaced the clay tile with plastic perforated pipe. You've also got sand choice and cut lines. So what are you thinking about? Well, sand wise, what sort of sand are we choosing, what is the angular repose of the sand, what is the drainage characteristics of sand, and more importantly on the links, given the orientation of the bunker, how likely is it to blow out. So those will be things that we'll be coming up with in the next few weeks when we're choosing sand to go in the springs. Cut lines, where is the approach going to go, how is that going to tie in the bunker and make the bunker more in play, and also make the approach that little bit bigger. And finally, visibility from the fairway. So when you stand in the fairway now and you see the finished aesthetic, can you see both bunkers? And you can beautifully. They're beautifully stepped and they're going to create a great aesthetic appeal when they're finished. So just some of the minor things that you think about there, and these are really just 50% of the things that you think about when putting a bunker into situ. A lot there to go on. And the bottom left hand corner, popularity. And I can't decide whether it's going to be popular or not. That is entirely up to the individual golfer. All I know is that it'll be in the right place and do the right job. So just moving this on, this is the first bunker then revetted of those two bunkers on the right of 14. And you can see some of the approaches being prepped as well, and the second bunker is still to be revetted, and we've drained it this week, so we'll hopefully get to revetting that at the start of next week, and that's going to look beautiful when it's done. You can already see that the first one looks great. Now I'm not all for uniformity of revetted bunkers, and what I mean by that is the actual revetting itself is exemplary, and I would argue that's some of the best revetting that you'll ever see. A really neat job, but I don't need it to look uniform all the way around. I like the revet to follow the landform, and I think that is what looks best, and therefore we get individual looking bunkers. We don't get all our bunkers looking the same. We get real individual character to them. And that's come out absolutely beautifully, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these ones finished, and I think that's a transformation of that hole already. And finally, just a drone image there of the bunkers in progress on the right, and the bunker finished there on the left. And once the bunkers on the right are finished, I'll get a drone image out there and share that on social media for you. And you can see there, if you can take the green back into the back right corner, that back right bunker is going to be beautifully in play, particularly when all of those are mowed down to, you know, between 7 and 10 mil. That's going to look fantastic. And genuinely really happy with how those have come up, and really looking forward to seeing the finished result next week of those bunkers, which I'm sure you are too. So following 14, numerically it makes sense to go over at the 15th. Those eagle-eyed of you will have noticed that last year we completed the green side right bunker at 15, and it is our intention within the next couple of weeks to get over to the green side left and complete the bunkering there. What we have at 15 is a beautiful ridge line that runs the entirety of the green, and it's my feeling that we need to utilise that more for a better aesthetic and a better playability. To do that, what we're going to do is build inside the current bunker that's there. So you'll notice there that a scaled down bunker will be the first one that will be built inside there. That'll be a natural revetted face using turf harvested off our own turf nursery. We'll then soil through the middle, and two further bunkers will be placed where the arrows are currently on the screen. The back left of these will likely wrap round the corner, but each bunker will vary in shape and size, again to try and avoid that sort of too uniform appearance. We'll soften all the landform around the top to make for a better, cleaner mow, and also allow the ball to gather into the bunker acceptably. The green is going to be extended to the front and back left, quite a long hole from the tee, so just to make that a little bit more appealing, and also to make those two bunkers at the back left a better proposition with a green shape that is more suited to them. So that's 15 that we should get to in the next couple of weeks, I hope. So our biggest work this winter will be likely the 16th, which will start in the new year, and as you can see from the picture, there's quite a lot going through there, and I've tried to number this so we can reference it. and I'll talk you through that now. So numbers 1 and 4 relate to the bunker renovation, which I think most of you would have gleaned would have been happening anyway. The first bunker on the right there is staying in a very similar place, just getting tucked a little bit further into the mound and close at the green. So again, utilising that high back face for high back revetted wall. Not in play the back revetted wall, you won't be playing out of that side of it, but it just means it's more visible from the tee, so the depth won't necessarily increase. And number 4 is the bunker on the left, and again, most of you will have gleaned that's going to get split into two. The front right one's going to get tucked further in close at the green and will be a small pot bunker revetted, and the back left one will be elongated, again tucked further into the green and offset against the front one. Everything within that black line there will be more at approach height at between 7 and 10 mil, but prior to do that we're going to strip all that area out, so all the turf out of that area is coming out and all the root zones coming out of it as well. And the reason for that is we're wanting to do a better job of the bunkering, want to replace the turf areas within there that aren't very good, and we're wanting to soften some of the mounding, particularly front right, just to try and make that a little bit easier to maintain, but more importantly to give more variety with your short game areas, so that we can put more clubs in people's hand there. So the rolling topography will still roll a little more subtly than it rolls now. There's a mound there right in front of the first bunker that you can't really see from the drone image that will come out to make the bunker more visible. But what we'll have there is areas that we can put off, areas that we can chip off, areas that we can play bump and runs off, and they'll be better maintained, they won't scalp off and they won't burn off, as you can see from the picture there they're doing currently. Where number 2 is, that currently gets mown as rough, but that's going to go into an approach. So we're going to have a tongue of approach there as well, which is going to be an added feature, and most likely we'll try and add some irrigation into that to help that knit in and make sure that we can keep grass on that for most of the year. So mound and softened in that area, turf stripped out, root zone stockpiled, bunkers redone, and then returfed with new turf that we're going to buy in for this occasion because it's a larger scope of area. The area with the yellow lines is where post sand scrape's going to go in, and that's a sand scrape for dune vegetation and a bare sand habitat. So what we have in there, and some of you will historically know this, is an old bunker shape right in front of the green there. Well, I say right in front of the green, actually in front of the approach, and it's a very, very nice shape. And it actually follows a little ridge line that curls its way and creates a plateau approach that would be number 2. So what we're proposing is turning that into a sand scrape, so taking a digger in there, sand scraping through that area and tying that into the long rough, and then taking these blue dotted paths, taking these round the sand scrape and through onto the approach, onto these plateau approaches, so that you can approach the green from 2 angles. That sand scrape will be beautiful through there, and the whole aesthetic of the actual hole itself will be massively improved. A lot more diversity in short game area around the green, without going OTT and massively changing the hole too much, which is what we were trying to avoid. We were just trying to make something that was fairly decent, that little bit better. All of this kind of visible from the tee, so a great aesthetic there, and we're looking forward to doing that one. I think that's going to be a real sort of signature hole, and it's going to be a fantastic look to it. So we're proposing to start that in the January time, once we've got all the other works tied up, and once we've got all our guys back off holiday, and then we'll be able to commit a full squad to this, because this is going to take some effort and some turfing, as you can imagine. So that's hole number 16. So another smaller project, and hopefully one we'll get to before the end of the winter, after all the other works are completed, is this 8th island, or donut bunker as I like to call it. Aesthetically it's very, very poor and one of the worst on the golf course, and it would be our ideal to come and sort this out this winter if we get the time. Basic premise is to remove the island. We'd still like to see a bunker there, just a little bit smaller, again revetted to complement the greenside bunkers, again within striking distance of the green, and then try and incorporate that into the cut line. Bring all the back half in, fill all the back half in, and level this down and get rid of the island. A project that we'd like to get to this winter, if time allows, and just tidy that up, because it's a bit of an eyesore. So again, this picture is very much if we get there, we get there. This is the third hole, and if time allows us, we'd like to do something with this year. But again, it's just really dependent on other works and how the weather goes over this winter, etc. So these are the third fairway bunkers that I've seen from the drone. These have been past a lifespan now for a while, often destroyed by the rabbits that come out of the buckthorn area. Hopefully some of that should be rectified with some selective buckthorn removal. However, the bunkers themselves will need renovating at some stage. You can see in the bottom right hand corner there the buckthorn area that's getting done at the end of November, start of December, and within there's some nice humping and hollowing that we'll probably incorporate into the sand scrape at some stage, whether that be this year or in years to come. The bunkers themselves are currently revetted. The idea would be to go to a naturalized style on these bunkers. As they go, they're probably in about the right area, so the style of them would change simply. The bunker on the right, we again would like to tie that into a wider sand scrape through that rough area there. So again, it all just comes down to time and whether we get to those this year or not. But if not, then we'll certainly try and get to them next year. So that's the third fairway bunkers, and we'll see how we get on with that. So that's me signing off from the winter work. Just wanted to take care of possibly a couple of glaring omissions before I sign off completely though. The first was around green sizing. A few of you mentioned about green sizing this year, and we will be taking greens back out towards the heads over the course of the autumn, winter and spring, when the heights of cut are at 5.5mm on greens and 7mm respectively on colours. It's a fairly easy time to do it, and this is because now we're settled with where our approaches are, where our extended runoffs are, and where our cutouts are. Having mowed those out this year, we can now start creeping the greens back out to where we think they should be, so that proper scales again. So I value your patience with that, but that's something we're getting on with this winter. Tree work, I haven't really talked about tree work a lot, mainly just problems with the exterior. As you know, there are issues on the golf course with trees, density being the biggest issue, as the picture amply suggests, and that's the fifth. But particularly from holes 5 to 10 we have issues with density. Why do I say we have issues? Well, trees, root systems could grow up to 3 times the size of the tree, so they sap water, nutrient, and cause various issues with greens. They also starve the greens of sunlight at this time of year when they need it most, and that causes high disease prevalence within these areas. So these areas need thinning out. Now, I'm not here to suggest that Longniddry shouldn't be a hybrid golf course. I more welcome the fact that it is, simply for the fact that it makes it unique, which is something we've talked about in the presentation about how we enhance that uniqueness of the course. But all I'm saying is that we possibly need to thin these areas out, get some corridors of light in there, and make sure that our turf performs optimally. We're a golf course that are open most of the year, if not all of the year, unlike inland, because we are based on sand. And why that's a blessing, it can also be sometimes a curse, because it means that we're always busy and therefore we accommodate a high amount of foot traffic. Now, if we are going to do that, we need our turf to be in the best possible condition. And in areas around 5, 6, 8, etc., that's not the case, and we struggle in those areas with the tree coverage. And you'll notice throughout the winter that's why we're a lot more prudent when necessary to put those certain greens onto winter greens for added protection. Whereas if we could get the light in there, etc., and the airflow in there, that wouldn't be as necessary going forward, and hence the reason we need to get on with that at some stage. We have spoken to the relevant parties about acquiring licenses for thinning licenses, etc., so I'll keep you posted on how we get on with that, and if we plan to start that and when we plan to start that. But for now, we'll just be doing sporadic tree works when the weather dictates, i.e. when there's snow on the ground, etc., etc. The trees lead me on to the tees, and that's not a poem. You'll notice I haven't mentioned tees in there much either. Now, the tees grass coverage wise are probably as good as I've seen them since we've been here. However, I'm not unawares that the tees need reconstructing. In a lot of places the tees aren't level and therefore need reconstructing. What I wanted to talk about though was, at the start we talked about getting the exterior right before we do the interior. So would you put a bathroom into a house that was falling down? And that analogy works very, very well for our tees and areas, particularly like 2, and 12 come to mind, so trees and buckthorn. Where we're putting in brand new tees and spending a good few £100s, if not thousands of pounds, on constructing tees, we're possibly putting them into areas where we're already destined to fail, and we're going to have to keep reconstructing. And I would argue that some of those tees have been reconstructed a hell of a lot over the years, and unfortunately, if we'd got the exterior right, that possibly wouldn't have been the case. Therefore, tees are something we know that needs doing, but is it worth doing before we get the exterior right? We also have other issues with tees in the sense that our irrigation lines, a lot of our irrigation heads are in the middle of the tees, which they shouldn't be. They should be on the outsides of the tees. So if we're going to reconstruct tees, are we then going to reconfigure our pipework? Is it worth redoing the pipework at that stage? I would suggest it probably is. And also redoing the heads as well so that they're in the right place. So there's a lot of thought that's going into the tees and how best to approach that at the minute. For now, what I'd like to get settled on is I would like to get our greenside bunkers finished first, and at least we've got through them all in one go, and that'll be us through them in just over 2 years, which is an excellent effort. And then we could start looking at doing wider things with the tees. We possibly may do something with a couple of tees this year, but again, it all just depends on time, and I'd be merely speculating on that. But it really is my desire to get the wider canvas right first before we start putting good architecture and spending good money on good root zone, good tees turf, good irrigation prep, to put them into areas where they possibly could fail. So that's a work in progress. That's something that we keep re-evaluating, and we will keep re-evaluating, and hopefully if we don't get to tees renovation this year, we'll certainly get some done next year once all our greenside bunkers are tidied up. But I will keep you informed on that, and your patience is very, very much appreciated with that. So that's it from me, and that's it from this presentation. You'll be pleased to know I appreciate the time you've taken to sit through that with me, and go through some of the things that have been going on the last couple of years, and also some of the winter work that we're doing this year. I just wanted to take a quick time to say thank you to all of our staff, who I'm sure you'll agree are working tirelessly to produce some of the surfaces that they have, and I know they're excited about some of the winter project work we're doing this year. I'd also like to thank our divot crews who come out regularly to help, but also like to thank you, the membership, for your continued support and words of encouragement. So I'll leave it with you there. Thanks for your time, and thanks for taking the time to watch this, and goodbye.